And here we are. We are live. Welcome back to another edition of Real Talk. So bear with us. Just a couple of technical issues as we're getting going there. So before we start, I'd like to mute this to start with. We just want to acknowledge the space where you are right now. We want to acknowledge where your feet are standing right now. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and where you stand right now. And we are thankful for the nurturing care that the traditional owners have delivered to this land for thousands of years. And we pay our respect to our elders past, elders past, present, and emerging. And we extend our welcome to all Torres Strait and Aboriginal people that are with us today. So here we are again. We're still in lockdown. We still can't play rugby, so we're finding ways to stay connected. And I'm really excited about this one. We talk a lot about rugby being about respect, and I just can't talk highly enough around when we talk about rugby and referees. Referees are such an important part of our game. It's one of those things, if we don't have referees, there are no games. Like, it's very easy to turn up in a field, and if one side's a bit short, then we can help out. But 9 times out of 10, if we're without a referee, we can't play. And I think that's down to the fact that us rugby players, 99% of us don't understand the rules. We just pretend we know the rules, and just if we make it up on the field, we're just lying. It's such a integral part of our game. And with that, I'd like to extend my welcome to the president of the Victorian Referees Association, Sir Major Tom. Welcome.
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks very much. It's a great privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
How are you?
I'm actually okay. I guess, Brendan, like all of us, we're saddened by the situation we found ourselves in last year. We should be, I guess, a little bit grateful for the little bit of rugby we got to play and referee this year. And I'm grateful for small moments in my week, like a certain amateur DJ who gives me a little bit of pleasure with his music from time to time.
And Tom, I'm going to call you out too, because we talk a lot in the Masters about checking in with each other. I got a really nice message from someone last month checking in to make sure that I'm okay, to make sure I'm okay. And that, my friend, was you. So thanks so much for doing that. I showed my wife that and said, this is why I love this community, I love this game. And for that, just that little thing for you, mate, I'm incredibly thankful. So it's not about me. You've got a special guest. And with that,
I do have a special guest, and thanks to Ian Barker for inviting me to be with this special guest. I'm not sure that everyone on the call, Brennan, is aware, but we're very privileged in Victoria as refs to get access to the most senior refs, the best referees in the world. And generally, if there's a test in Melbourne, we're permitted to approach the referees, and almost all of them, to a person, has agreed to attend a dinner with the Victorian referees. They provide great insights. They're always very open, and one notable year we had the previous 2 Rugby World Cup final refs in the room. We had Craig Joubert and Nigel Owens. More recently, we've had Matthew Carley and Wayne Barnes. The last test, I think, in Melbourne, we had Paul Williams from New Zealand with Pascal Gozer and Marius van der Westerhuizen from South Africa. So we've been really privileged with those guys. But I'm not sure, Brennan, if I've ever been more nervous about interviewing a referee than I have about our special guest tonight.
Oh, I like it. I like seeing a ref nervous. I love it.
I'm supposed to be calm and level-headed, but look, it is a great privilege to introduce Angus Gardner. Without doubt, one of the world's premier referees, participated in the last World Cup. But Angus, I'm going to ask you to indulge me and allow me just to talk a little bit about the Victorian Masters, since Brendan was so kind to invite us to this. The Victorian Masters, for those on the call who aren't familiar with the group, purport to create competition, rugby competition for over 35s, to keep fit and play in a social, safe and welcoming environment for all. I can't tell you how little that understates this organisation, and why I'm certainly proud to be associated in some small way with the group. And it really epitomises the game, the work that these people do. Yes, on the field, they provide a safe environment, or so I thought, until my second Masters game, which I had to call off early with a red card after things escalated. So I'd only been warned the week before, Angus, that I should be grateful, because they'd mostly filtered the dickheads out of Masters rugby. So I guess I learned a lesson: never underestimate the power of white line fever. But this group provides so much off the field as well. They participate and support a campaign called Wheels for George. George is an 8-year-old boy, has a very rare condition called centronuclear myopathy. He requires constant care, and the Vic Masters provide support for George and his family. They provide support for Matthew Vosa, who broke his neck playing rugby in 2015 and is confined to a wheelchair. But in the spirit that Brendan mentioned earlier, Gus, most of all, these blokes support each other. They've provided me with some of my treasured highlights. My first experience with them, in fact, was I think there were 3 or 4 teams at Northern, and I went there to referee, and the first thing they did was sit everyone in a room with a men's mental health expert to talk to them about men's mental health. So, Brendan, I learnt my lesson to check in with you from you. The other highlights certainly have been things like the Super Rugby pre-games at Amy, the Old Blacks and Wannabes, the emotional haka performed not by one squad but 2 squads. Another emotional day, the Deaf Rugby Gala with Australian Deaf Rugby. One of the most spine-chilling speeches I think I've heard was by the Australian Deaf Rugby coach. It was so those moments provided by the Masters, and then some of the most challenging games I've refereed, not only the second one, but the 2019 Masters Grand Final, Victorian Masters Grand Final. I joined in with the players beforehand, said, let's just keep everything calm, boys. I'm sure, Gus, you will have seen this in your time. You look into the players' eyes, they're rolling. There's froth around their mouths, and they're saying, yeah, Tom, we're only here to have fun. One of the most difficult games I've ever refereed. So, Brendan, thank you. Great privilege to be here, and certainly a great privilege to have some time with Angus. Angus, let me just say a few words first about you, an Australian rugby professional referee, of course, appointed to your first Super Rugby game, to the Super Rugby panels in 2012, I believe, and your first game involved the Rebels. You did arrange for the Rebels to win, didn't you?
Well, they were ahead at half time, if I recall, and they were looking pretty good. But then I think a couple of late tries from, I'm going to say, the speedsters on the wing, Dom Shipley and maybe Ioane, I think, sealed the deal for the Reds in the end.
There were no dodgy decisions?
Oh, a lot. I was way out of my depth.
Just warning you that you're surrounded by Rebels, of course. So
that's right. No, for both teams, mate. I think both teams would have had a lot of good cause to have come back to me over a number of decisions in that game. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come to how that works out later on. You took up rugby refereeing at the age of 15, I think. At I guess I'm sure you were at the Shore School on the lush, leafy green North Shores of Sydney.
Yep.
I've done some research, Gus, and I looked up some of the most famous old boys of shore. You're not one of them.
No.
There is of course Sir Frank Packer.
Yeah.
Jim Penman, known as the founder of Jim's Mowing franchise.
Didn't know that.
Errol Flynn.
Oh, there you go.
And I understand they are all swashbuckling playboys, and I just wondered if you fitted that profile of a shore old boy.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And I think that those are some legendary names that did attend the school, but I'm sure their legacy is well dead now, Tom, I think.
Just a few other highlights that have come to me. You were appointed to your first test in November 2011, which was an Oceania Cup match between Papua New Guinea and Vanuatu in Port Moresby. Did you enjoy your time in Port Moresby?
Hell of an experience. I much to my wife's, I suppose, detest, we were due to get married basically the day I got back from Port Moresby, and she granted me the permission to go and do my first test match. But she said, if you miss the flight or the flight gets cancelled, then don't bother coming back home. So there was some nervous moments while I was away on tour for that 2 weeks, but super interesting kind of experience. The game itself, wow, when we arrived at the stadium, we were greeted by riot police, and the entire stadium was fenced with razor wire, and you were kind of escorted into this kind of tunnel area, and then the doors were sealed behind you. So basically no one could get in or out. So that was kind of the first incredibly eye-opening moment. The field was then surrounded with riot police. And
Angus, just for the people on the call, that wasn't just for you. The riot. This is the way of life in Port Moresby, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And three of us got sent up there. 3 Aussies got sent up there. Myself, James Leckie, and Andrew Lees, and we were all appointed to referee one test match. There was 3 test matches in this little Oceania competition, and we all had one test each, and then we ran touch for each other. But what we didn't realise was that the local touch judges were appointed as the other touch judge. So for my first test match, I had Andrew as my assistant referee and then a local assistant referee. And he turned up high on beetle leaf. So in Port Moresby, they chew a nut, beetle nut, and it's like it's a native nut. They all chew it, and it's got some fun qualities to it is probably the right way to put it. So he turned up having, I think, chewed quite a bit of this and was kind of high as a kite. He also forgot his rugby boots as well. So we had to lend him a pair of rugby boots and kind of hope that he would do the job, which he did. He did admirably well. So, yeah, look, some phenomenal experiences that really only rugby can provide.
And did you find that the beetle nut helped with muscle recovery after the nut?
No comment.
After that, you went to, as so many refs who are refereeing internationally do, right? They tend to end up refereeing at a Junior World Championship. You were there in 2012 and had the semi-final, England and Ireland. Do you remember much about that game?
Yeah, it was my second. It was my second Junior World Championship. The first one I went to was in South Africa, and I was super young, and there was a lot of older referees that a lot of experience. Glenn Jackson was there, and a lot of players that are now on the international scene that are kind of players that I didn't actually realise at the time were such. Would turn out to be such superstars and amazing players. Bowden Barrett was there playing for New Zealand. There was the Welsh captain Sam Warburton. He was captain for Wales. So it's kind of it's really interesting. You go to these Junior Rugby World Cups and you see these amazing players, And at the time, you don't necessarily know, which ones are going to kick on, but it's kind of amazing to look back on and see who was there. So in this England-Ireland game, Maro Itoje was the captain for England. And so, just, again, great. Sorry, the lights have just gone off at the office here. Great experience there at the Junior Rugby World Cups.
Yeah, and you and I had a conversation earlier, and I just wanted to remind the audience and for those refs that are on there, we had Scott Young from Rugby Australia come and talk to us in 2014, I think it was, the year before the 15 World Cup, and he talked about how disappointed he was and that no Australian referee had been appointed as a referee for the 2015 Rugby World Cup in England. And you, of course, went as an AR, but there was no referee in the middle. And given our status, and given that Australia made the final, the on-field things went all right from the players' point of view, but there were no referees. And I think it's a great credit to Rugby Australia and to Scott, but also to you, who then led the charge to turn all that around, so that by 2019, I think we targeted as Rugby Australia to have at least one and possibly two referees there, and so it transpired, right? So what? And I will come back down to a bit more about your rugby journey, but what do you think in recent years has made a difference with the recruitment and development of referees, such that we have two or three or perhaps more who are now on the test panel?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, Tom. I think I think certainly in that period between 2015 and 2019, we kind of had to have a really big look at the program and what we were doing and how we were, running that program internally. And so there was a number of kind of changes that were made to, everything from the mental side of the program, the physical side, how, what our philosophy was as referees, and how that worked at both a Super Rugby level, remembering that Super Rugby has always been the pathway for us through to the international level, and then looking at kind of the referee profile, which I know most referees on the call will kind of be aware that Rugby Australia kind of put a lot of work into defining some key attributes that made or would make good professional referees and make good referees in general. So doing a lot of work around that profile made a huge difference in being able to kind of translate and put into words and paper what we were looking for. I think the other thing was that we were pretty blessed to have people like Nick and more recently Damon Murphy, who are ex-players, and I think Glenn Jackson really led the way in terms of the ex-player transitioning across to refereeing. And I think that broke down a lot of barriers, because I think that, certainly with Glenn's profile, when he came from, having played 100 Super Rugby games for the Chiefs and then went up and played, for a number of seasons up in the UK in the Premiership and New Zealand Maori, and I think it broke down a lot of the barriers between referees and players and how referees were received and viewed in the game. And I think that, players who have played at the elite level bring such a different dimension to how they view the game, and also then how they interact within the game. And it was really interesting. I remember my first tour with Nick for Super Rugby, and we'd been sent on a 2-week tour to South Africa. His first game was Stormers Sunwolves at Newlands in Cape Town. And, Newlands and some of the big stadiums around the world can be very intimidating places in terms of the crowd, the occasion itself, the history that goes with a lot of those stadiums. A lot of those stadiums in South Africa, the stands are almost vertical and you feel like people are on top of you. But, Nick walks out for the warm-up, and I said, oh, mate, you would have played here before? And he said, yeah, I've played here, quite a few times. And so as a player, he's already walked out into that environment, or he's played in that environment. And so, that's kind of the big difference, I think, between the player coming across and I suppose a career or a journeyman referee, that you've already had some of those big experiences.
Yeah. And just on that, and I wasn't going to go down this path, but since you've taken us down that path, and I don't think you have to have played the game to make the best referee. Do you have a view about whether that experience, I mean, obviously with their experience in big games, it makes a difference, but in terms of making better referees, do some of the players turned referees make better referees than those referees that haven't played?
No, and absolutely not. And we have seen some, ex-Super Rugby referees, referee only 1 or 2 seasons at Super Rugby, and then it hasn't worked out as well. So yeah, look, there's definitely no guarantees, and conversely, I think, if I can kind of draw a bit of a comparison, kind of starting early as a referee and learning those kind of key fundamental skills that you learn, as a referee starting out around position and advantage and where to be and all those type of things. The player turned referee doesn't have that, so it's kind of this kind of, there's some elements in their profile that need to be, need to be added to. Whereas I think often referees that have got into it and just done it, most of their lives have a lot of that foundational piece, and the ex-player needs to develop that way more quickly. And sometimes that doesn't fit, and sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. So, but have you ever met in your refereeing career, though, a number 9 who wouldn't do a better job with the whistle than you're doing at the time?
Well, I often say that, most of the time, if you have a good number 9, he refs the game for you. And then that makes your job so much easier. So, yeah.
And you did share with me earlier, for those who aren't keeping up with it, that Angus's next match or next test match is the Eagles, the USA Eagles, and the All Blacks in Washington, D.C. So the All Blacks, they don't have number 9s who talk to the ref much, do they?
Oh, I think they've got 3 or 4 in the team. I think, they've got TJ and Aaron Smith, and so I'll get plenty of help.
You won't be influenced by TJ helping you with a whistle, will you?
Never.
Just going back to because I did get a bit lost there. So just going back after you were at school and how you started out, because I think there might be some young referees on the call who are interested in how did you get into refereeing? We did hear as an aside that Nigel Owens had got into refereeing because he broke a school rule or got a detention of some kind. Yeah. And the detention was either to be served or he had to referee a game, and so he decided to referee the rugby, and that's how he got into it. So we sort of went down the path that guys who break rules or get detention or break the law become referees. So we also decided that night after a couple of beers that perhaps on the basis of law breaking, Richie McCaw would have made a great referee. But how did you first get into refereeing at 15?
Yeah, look, I had a hereditary back issue that kind of came out when I was developing around the age of 15. I had a thing in my back called Sherman's disease, and it meant that the disc size in my back was not was not a normal size, and so I'd played rugby up until 15 and was super passionate about the game. I loved playing it and doing it with my mates, and so look, as a 15-year-old, it's super devastating to then be told, hey, you shouldn't play rugby because you'd be at risk of doing yourself an injury. And so, I went through quite a tough period as a 15-year-old in trying to kind of come to terms with that and not being able to play with my mates and be a part of that and play the game I loved. And I was very blessed that there was a teacher at the school who was a referee with New South Wales Referees Association, and he ran the refereeing program at the school. And he said, "Look, I'd love to kind of take you under my wing and help you, help you stay a part of the game. And in as a capacity as a referee, would you be interested?" And I balked at it. I said, "No way. I'm, not interested. Cop a lot of shit." And it wasn't something that caught my eye. And to be fair, I didn't overly enjoy it while I was at school. It was interesting. I guess I found it was kind of a hard thing for me to kind of really get into. But it wasn't really until I left school and started to ref senior rugby and really kind of embraced that culture around referees associations and what it meant to be a part of a refereeing community that was part of the game, that was there to service the game. And I really kind of found my love for refereeing, sub-districts rugby to start off with. And I enjoyed the camaraderie and the gentleman side of the game, where clubs would, always ask you back to have a beer with them after the game. And I think that's such a special thing about our game, particularly at the community level. And so, I guess I found my passion there. And it's interesting, the backs kind of stayed with me all the way. And at the start of the year, I ended up having some surgery on it, which is funny that what got me into refereeing kind of eventually caught up with me and then kept me out of the game for a year. So it's been an interesting kind of reflection on that as well.
I did pick up on that earlier when you said, that's what kept you from playing the game, and here you are with back surgery all these years on. How are you, and how are you coming up after that? Because we've missed you in the game, of course, and you may be surprised to know I've got some Kiwi friends who say that you are their favourite referee, and get back soon, please, Angus. So there's a lot of people around.
Well, that's very kind. I must be lucky that maybe when I referee, the New Zealand teams win. So,
especially if it's a Crusader Lions sort of, or Crusader Chiefs sort of final, it's pretty easy to be popular, right? At least after. So how are the injuries? Because there was a complication, wasn't there, beyond the back that sort of you were coming back for this test season, and then you had another injury. Can you tell us about that?
So I had the back surgery at the start of the year, which was to remove a herniated disc, and that went well. And then as I was kind of building up to make a return to the Trans-Tasman Super Rugby, I then blew out my calf in the first 2 minutes of my return game on the sideline, Waratah's Hurricanes here at the Sydney Cricket Ground. So it's the first time ever I've come off in a game. So I hobbled off and sat up back with an ice pack, and then so I'd done a pretty serious calf injury, which was back related, and I guess that there always is some complications. So and I guess, frustratingly, that meant that I'd missed, the Super Rugby Trans-Tasman, and it also meant that I missed the July international window as well. So, but, it's funny, Tom, because, the first part of the year I'd probably sum up as being frustrating, but I guess the second part, and once I knew that I was due for a long stint off, has actually been, one of the best periods of my life in terms of being able to, reflect on a number of things and also grow, because I think we certainly grow as people and as humans in adversity and in challenges in our life. And I think, I'm actually look back on the surgery and the injury now and say that, whilst it was challenging, I'm kind of grateful for it.
Oh, that's good. And of course, you're keen to get back into it. What's the the program back look like from here with you?
Yeah, so I head off in 2.5 weeks to the States for my first game, which is as you said, the USA All Blacks, and then I head across to Scotland and run touch for Scotland Tonga, which Nick Berry's refereeing, and then I go down to Romania and ref Romania v Uruguay in Bucharest, and then I come back up to Scotland and ref Scotland South Africa. And then I head to Twickenham and run touch for England, South Africa, and then I come home to hopefully some home quarantine and not 2 weeks, not 2 weeks in a room with no windows.
You've been kind of home quarantining for a year now, so well, not quite for a year, but I'm sure you'll be pleased to get out. I did read somewhere that you have 3 young children, and while you've sort of been locked down, you've been homeschooling. So did you beg World Rugby to appoint you to European tests? Yeah,
and the longest tour they could possibly manage. Well, it's funny you say that, Tom, because most regular years we're away a big portion of the year, and I think a couple of years ago I did 160 nights away from home, and I did something like 65 or 70 flights in that year. So, it's funny from a family perspective when they're so used to having you get, kind of come and go, and then all of a sudden you're lumped in with them for a year. There was certainly an adjustment period, and I'm sure my wife will tell you that. There was parts where I was a bit of a grump and wished I was back on tour again. But no, look, it was great to be at home and spend the quality time with the family.
I think we sometimes forget that you make a big sacrifice in terms of family life as an international referee. It all sounds quite glamorous, of course, but it has its moments, and being away from your family for that sort of time is a big sacrifice to make. I know quite a number of the guys want me to ask some questions around a bit more around rugby and some of your highlights and lowlights, and I've got some more difficult questions later on. So I'll start off with an easy one. Israel Folau treated fairly or not?
Oh, wow.
Joe, that's a joke.
Wow, I was like, you're going straight in.
Don't answer that one. That was a furphy.
Well played.
So in terms of some highlights, the matches that you remember, the stadium you just talked about, Newlands. I was personally quite excited living in London when you were first appointed to Twickenham. Tell us about some of your favourite stadia around the world.
Yeah, look, certainly Twickenham, and I did England and Ireland there as a Six Nations decider in 2017, and it was certainly a highlight. Just a great occasion and experience, and we had a really interesting week leading up because it was snowing quite heavily in London at that stage, and I remember arriving at Twickenham and. The fantastic thing about some of these test matches is all the stuff that goes on beforehand. So when you arrive at Twickenham, they do love a briefing. And so you have a security briefing. So you basically go into the referee change room and I'm thinking, oh, great, I've got some of my own space and can get changed and get in the headspace and knock at the door and, literally 15 people roll into the change room. We're all sitting on top of one another and we're trying to get ready for the game. So we start with the security briefing and big burly security man comes in and says, yep, there's no threats today. And, if there is any threats, we'll radio you through the AR and you'll stop the game and you'll come off this way and you'll direct the players that way. And then you'll come to a holding cell and, a whole rigmarole. Then the weatherman comes in and says, look, pretty good weather for the 80 minutes. Chief medical officer comes in, introduces himself, and chief paramedic, and so forth and so on, and lots of shaking hands and introductions. And then the final piece of the puzzle was the groundsman, who usually doesn't come in there, and he'd been taking quite a low profile standing in the corner. And I'd noticed looking across, and I thought, who's this guy standing across there in his gumboots? And he's kind of got grass all over him and paint, and I thought, oh, that's odd, but didn't make it. Anyway, he introduced himself. He said, look, I'm the groundsman. And I said, oh, nice to meet you. And he said, look, just so you know, we're going to paint the lines in blue today, because if it snows, then the blue line markings will show up against the white snow. And I said, oh, that's great. And I said, but we've got one big problem. I'm blue and green colourblind. So I said, I won't be able to see the blue line markings. Well, mate, his face went pale. And he said, oh. So he said, right, well, leave me with it. So come out to the warm-up. There is 50 groundsmen on the ground repainting the lines from blue to white before the game. So super, super interesting kind of story there. And then in terms of other grounds, obviously Ellis Park in South Africa would probably be my other main one as well. I think just the history of what happened there in the '95 World Cup final with South Africa, and yeah, it's a special place.
Yeah.
And
I'm interested in the security guy saying no threats. Well, that'd be right. The game hadn't started. There'd be plenty after the game, wouldn't there?
A lot after the game. A lot of death threats after the game.
And just on that, and we shouldn't talk about your low points, but we did hear from Wayne Barnes that after a certain 2007, I think it was, Rugby World Cup semi-final in Cardiff,
yep.
The infamous New Zealand-France match, could have been a quarterfinal, in fact, forward pass, that he tells the story that the only way he could escape the threats and get out of the stadium back to the hotel, they got him in the back of an ambulance.
Yeah.
And, no one's going to... Have you ever been in that position? Particularly, I guess we think about South Africa with, some of those situations. Have you ever been after a game in those sorts of situations?
Touch wood, Tom, haven't, and I'm grateful for that. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing that story, the way Barnesy tells it, because it's such a great story. And I think Tony Spreadbury was running touch for him, and Tony was a paramedic. And I think Tony knew some of his colleagues were the ambulance operators. So he kind of organised his mates to kind of back up the ambulance to the referee's change room, and in they piled. So, yeah, it's a great story. Look, I guess the closest I'd go to that is that in France, you do get one of the most amazing police escorts I've ever been involved in. And so often when you do a game in Paris at Stade de France, the kickoff's at 9 o'clock. So
in the evening, 9 o'clock.
Yeah, because they've got this primetime news service that runs, and they essentially want all the programs out of the way before they put the rugby on. And so it's a 9 o'clock kickoff. And the traffic in Paris, usually on a weekend around 8 o'clock at night, is basically their peak hour, because everyone goes out late and loves socialising out late. So the only way you can get to the Stade de France is with a police escort. And I remember my first game at the Stade was France New Zealand, and I remember Jaco Piper rang me and said, mate, all I'd say is make sure you get in the first car in the escort, because mate, you're in for one hell of a ride. And he was not wrong. The speed at which we went through the streets of Paris to get to the Stade de France was absolutely incredible. We had 3 policemen on bikes kicking cars out of the way, honking their horn. I had to lie down for about 5 to 10 minutes when I actually arrived, just to kind of compose myself, because it was pretty hairy. But the more interesting thing was after the game, and we were waiting to kind of be cleared to leave the stadium after the game, and I guess sometimes you have to wait around until the crowd dissipates, until everything's kind of been cleared before you can leave. And I remember I was chatting to one of the policemen that was one of the escort drivers. He was one of the motorcycle riders. After the game, we were just standing around waiting to get back in the escort, and he was the chief of police on the bike, and he said, "What would you like to see, Mister or Monsieur?" And I said, "Pardon?" He said, "What sights would you like to see?" And I said, "Well, I've had a great week in Paris, and I have seen a couple of things, and yeah, it's been fantastic." No. What sights you want to see tonight? And I said, "Look, I'll take the Louvre and the Arc de Triomphe." And I thought, "Oh, this is an absolute stitch up." But anyway, on the way home, we had the police escort, drive to the Louvre, stop, get out, take a photo at the Louvre, shut everything off, couple of laps of honour around the Arc de Triomphe, and then back to the hotel. So some pretty amazing experiences.
Yeah, which is sort of the opposite of feeling your life's threatened because you made a few bad calls.
In the back of an ambulance. Yeah.
Look, it's a nice segue, though, into something that I think's a bit serious, and I'm sure Brendan would be happy for me to cover. We have a very well respected referee in the Vic Masters, Carl Dix. But what we're seeing in the game these days, perhaps more and more, is perhaps less of that respect. And someone you know well in Rugby Australia continues to talk about referees being custodians of the game. I first started in England, and I was told at the first night, your first duty is to uphold the spirit of the game, and your second duty is to uphold the laws. And I guess in that respect, in that aspect, as custodians of the game, we like to think we have respect, but we see less and less of it. And I can't help but think we need to earn it, don't we, as referees? What do you think we can do more of to try and put a halt to what some people say are declining standards of behaviour and kind of turn it around a bit? What more can we do as referees?
Look, I genuinely think, Tom, the importance of kind of just being honest and a bit vulnerable when something doesn't go right. And I think the more referees can show that we are only human and we're imperfect and we're going to get stuff wrong, I think the more people see the human side to us. We can't ref that perfect game. We will make mistakes. People will get upset. But I think the more we can kind of acknowledge that and just be humble and be honest and say, yeah, look, I made a mistake today. I stuffed up and I put my hand up for that. And I know sorry is probably not going to make any different for you, but I'm only human type thing. I think if people can see the human side of refereeing, and I know sometimes that's hard to portray and hard to get across, but I think the manner in which we communicate to players and probably spectators, and I think the way that we hold ourselves when we arrive and are hosted by clubs, because let's face it, when we referee at the community level, the club is hosting us. And so I think the way in which we kind of hold ourselves in those environments can set the tone in my book, rather than kind of walking in and thinking that we kind of own the joint, as you say. Yeah.
But we don't talk about mistakes on the field and turn decisions around. We do that over a bar afterwards, in the bar afterwards, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think those conversations are important, Tom, because it's those conversations over a beer where players and spectators see the human side of you and see that, yeah, hey, this bloke's willing to put his hand up and just be honest. Hey, missed that today, and yeah, it's probably a lot of other stuff as well. So,
and by doing that, we sort of settle it and leave it there, don't we? And it's probably good advice. Are you frustrated a little bit by some of the commentary in the media, mainly on television, of course, around decision making? It appears at times to some of us that the commentators do. I know they get a briefing at the beginning of every season about the laws, but it seems that sort of washes over them. Does that frustrate you?
Look, I guess, Tom, there's probably two parts to it. I think there's comments that are uninformed. They're probably the comments I think probably most frustrate people, the uninformed comments. But I guess to a certain extent that, commentators have their place in the entertainment, and I think, at the professional level, it's an entertainment business. The bottom line is that it's entertainment, and so referees play a role in the entertainment. The players do, the commentators do, the preamble, the media, and so we're all kind of entwined in this entertainment business at the professional level, and I think that. When you can see that for what it is, it kind of makes it less. I suppose less. I'm looking for the word. Is probably less. Less important, so to speak. It's just a comment more than anything, and their own opinion. But look, to be fair, we have great relationships with our commentators. We have great relationships with our commentators here as referees and in New Zealand. And, I think I've certainly had a number of times where a commentator's picked up the phone to me and say, "Hey, Gus, mate, can you help me out with explaining this or that?" And, commentators have really kind of embraced us, and I think that's a fantastic kind of part of the game that we can work together on it.
Well, of course, that Nigel has been engaged in the UK to provide special comments, and Wayne Barnes runs a little show where he has little Lego pieces sort of moving around the field on
his kids' figurines.
Sort of explaining the laws. When can we expect the Gus Gardner show?
Well, hopefully, Tom, I've got a few more years in me on the field. So,
Bones is still on the field. You don't have to wait.
Yeah. No, look, it'd be great. Hopefully, I'd love to see a laws segment on Rugby Heaven. That'd be great.
Yes, precisely.
Work.
Look, I know that it's a bit controversial, so please say if you can't talk about it, but just along the same lines in regards to respect, the recent Rassie Erasmus commentary on Nick was very disappointing, I think, for most people, certainly the referee community, but for most people in the game, I think. Do you have a view on that, or can you talk about it? I know there's still some things going on in the background. Yeah,
look, there are, and so I think I'll probably just choose what I say carefully here. But I think we come back to kind of custodians of the game and everyone trying to be in the game for the right reasons. And I think one of the things that we try to do at the international level is foster good relationships between coaches and referees and World Rugby, and we try to align as best we can. And we've had a number of meetings in recent years where referees and tier one coaches and coaches from around the world will actually be in a room discussing the game and how we can make it better and what we can do as a collective to improve. So, so look, it is certainly disappointing when when those comments are aired, especially when there's good intentions from everyone to try and build relationships. So of course we're in a game where there's sheep stations on the line as well, so we can't be naive to the fact that at the international and Super Rugby level that we can have a significant bearing on the game, and likewise the teams in the way that they also approach the game. So it's a really kind of challenging area for everyone involved.
It is something obviously that relates to that that whole respect thing that really the leaders of the game, including people like Rassie, really ought to be holding up those sorts of principles. It's ingrained and embedded within the game and written into the laws, in fact. So just along those lines, on a more light-hearted routine, I understand you in the week leading into a test match at World Rugby level now, the coaches have an opportunity to talk to the referee, meet with the referee, and if one wants to meet, then both are offered that opportunity.
Yep.
Can you tell us about some of those conversations with some of those coaches? Eddie Jones, for instance, I would imagine that would be an interesting conversation. But what are some of your favourite experience talking to coaches, and what are some of the things they've encouraged you to look for on the pitch later that week?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, Tom, because the whole pre-referee meeting is sometimes there's a lot of kind of gamesmanship, I think, going on in the background. It's really interesting. I've had coaches meetings where the first question that a coach asks is, "Have you seen the media? Have you seen what the other coach is saying about us?" And so there's a lot of fishing for information. There's a little bit of fishing for, kind of sussing out this referee perhaps before we get him on the weekend, what his headspace is like, how's his week been, has he been looked after, so forth and so on. And then there's, coaches who take a pretty direct approach, which is, here's 5 clips of them, and if you see this, what are you going to do? And you kind of put on the spot. So, you get the two ends of the spectrum. Eddie wants to talk about sport in general for the first 15, 20 minutes of his pre-game meeting, and obviously having been in Australia, how things in Australia, and what have you been up to, and those type of things. And then you get the very direct coaches, which are, here it is on a platter, and if you see this, what are you going to do? So they're really interesting, and conversely, what's interesting is at Rugby World Cup, we don't have those meetings. So once we get into a tournament situation, there's no pre-game meetings with coaches. World Rugby and us kind of say, here's how the tournament's going to be delivered, and off we go. So it's kind of interesting that for 3 or 3.5 years we have these pre-game meetings, and then for the last kind of year or 6 months we don't have them. So I do like to tell a story that I reffed New Zealand Argentina a few years back in New Zealand, and I had what I thought was going to be a huge run-in with the Argentinian coach. Argentina were up at half-time against the All Blacks, and early in the second half, I put Beauden Barrett in the bin for a cynical kind of killing the ball on the try line when Argentina are on the attack, and Argentina had a very, very good opportunity to kind of come away with winning that game. And I remember at the aftermatch function, the Argentinian coach kind of came at me pretty hard. I could see he kind of picked his moment to kind of make his beeline for me, and I thought, oh, gee, here we go. So he kind of came up to me and he said, "Angus, why did you put the New Zealand player in the bin?" And I thought, that's a bizarre question. I said, look, I was a bit taken back, so I probably went into way too much detail than what I thought, but I gave him my whole line of thinking, which was, you guys were on attack on the try line, and I felt like he came in at the wrong angle and then went off his feet and turned the ball over, and I just felt it was cynical. He said, "Yeah, they play their best rugby with 14 men. I think you should have not put him in the sin bin." And New Zealand actually went on to win that game with 14 men. So I kind of felt like I dodged a bullet there. But so yeah, coaches and referees, we're always going to not necessarily see eye to eye on everything, but it's an important relationship for the sake of the game. And I guess, Tom, what I would say about the pre-game meeting is that sometimes you do get a good insight into how a team is going to play or approach the weekend. And I think that in terms of your own preparation can be beneficial. And so I would say that would probably be the positive side of the pre-game meeting.
I think a few years ago that came out. I think Romain Poit was forewarned about I think it was Italy not contesting rucks
Yes.
with England in that Six Nations game, and that gave him the opportunity to, probably like a lot of us, that's a very obscure part of the law and something we hadn't seen at that level. It'd send me rushing for the law book just to make sure I was.
Absolutely. Yeah, you were spot on.
That was it was, and he talked about that he'd been pre-warned that they were going to do that so that he could be in a position to get it right. And a lot of clubs, even at community level, sir, we're not going to contest lineouts. Can we just go over the process? And you're right. Look, I know we're running out of time. We might have some questions from the audience. So guys,
perfect.
Send them in on the bottom of the screen and we'll ask them. A couple of other
That's a great question. There's that, Mike. When is World Rugby going to camp down on consistent crooked feeds at the scrum?
I reckon you should start,
Mike.
Angus, start with PJ Perenara in Washington, all right?
Okay, all right. Shall I start the trend, straight feeds?
So it is a source of great annoyance, and it does distinguish our game from that other rugby game that the ball doesn't go into the second row. But you might like to just explain, World Rugby have made a change in terms of the shoulder width allowance with the tunnel. Perhaps go over that for Mike.
Yeah, look, Mike, so just on your point, I think it's a great question. And by law, the feeding halfback, if we draw a line down the centre of the scrum, so where essentially where the two packs meet, if we drew a line straight down the centre, the feeding halfback doesn't actually have to stand in the middle. He can stand with his outside shoulder on that central line, but on his side. So there's already a bit of a bias before we start. And so I guess there's probably a couple of things. One, because he's actually starting on his side under law, it probably gives off, or it helps the perception that the scrum's not being fed straight. I think also the fact is that it's an area that we don't tend to focus on as much as other areas. And it's interesting, I often get the question, what law would you change? And that is the one law I would change. People say to me, hey, what would you change? And I would change that the referee actually feeds the ball to the scrum, because I think rugby is a game of contest. And I think if we're true to rugby being a contest, I think at scrum time, the referee should feed the ball to the scrum, and then both packs have a genuine opportunity to win possession at the scrum. So that would be the one thing I would change.
That's a great call, Angus, and I think Vic Masters is where they should start with that experiment.
Tom, you could be the first one. You could be the first referee to feed the ball at the scrum. Vic Masters.
You talk about feedback after the game, Angus. I would need that ambulance, I reckon. When you were coming through the ranks, your most admired referee, your role model referee that you enjoyed and tried to perhaps base yourself on?
Oh, look, at the time I was coming through, Australia was blessed with five of the best referees in the world. You had Gus Erickson, Peter Marshall, Scott Young, Andrew Cole, and Stu Dickinson. So, we were blessed with five, very well established referees. And then we had a number of, great talent coming through in Matt Goddard and those type of people. So, it wasn't hard to find referees to kind of look up to during that period. I guess I was very fortunate in that when a lot of those guys retired, we were essentially left with one really only full-time referee at one stage, which was Steve Walsh. And Steve had his contract torn up at New Zealand Rugby, and had come to Australia to, I guess, get his life in order, which he did. He gave up, drinking alcohol and really turned his life around. And Australian Rugby gave Steve a lifeline. They offered him a contract to continue refereeing here in Australia. And I guess I was kind of coming through the development panels at Rugby Australia at that point, and Steve and I really hit it off, and I loved his approach to refereeing, and I loved the way he refereed, and he took me under his wing and mentored me during that period, and I guess was probably instrumental in me, I think, having the opportunity to go to the 215 World Cup as an AR. I think if we remember at the time, Steve would have been selected as a referee to go, but he decided that it was the right time to retire and take up an opportunity to start his supermarket business just prior to 215. And so I guess off the back of that, I got a bit of an opportunity. And so, Steve's been a great mentor to me on and off the field. And I really respect the adversity that he had to deal with in his life. And I guess, making the most of the second chance that he was given. I think it's a great story.
And probably changed a little bit, Gus, the way that he a little bit more colloquial with the players on the pitch, more so than most other referees. He sort of changed that style a little bit, didn't he?
Yeah, he really led the way, I feel, in terms of how referees communicated on the field and had a dialogue and I think a rapport with players on the field that went quite deep. It wasn't a superficial kind of, I'm doing this just for the sake of doing it. It was actually a meaningful rapport that he tried to build with players on the field, and I think took that from him in how he articulated and explained his decisions. Yeah, it's
in the same vein in terms of most admired referee. Who's the best player you have refereed?
Oh, well, I think Richie McCaw has to be up there for sure.
I believe what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I refereed him not at All Blacks level. I refereed him a number of times for the Crusaders, and he's just a magician at the breakdown. It's almost like you blink and the ball's turned over, and you think,
that's because he's coming in from the side, Angus.
So look at Richie. Richie was a great player. I think more, in recent times, certainly, I think the product at Super Rugby in the past has been unbelievable. So there's just so many great players coming through at the moment.
And again, the
worst player to ref. Yeah. Well, I would have said a few years ago, probably TJ Perinara, because he used to challenge me so much, and it wasn't really until we kind of sat down and worked a couple of things out that we kind of were able to move forward. But I had some great moments with TJ early in my Super Rugby career. So I always had to do extra prep on how I was going to deal with the TJ factor going into games, or how I was going to deal with myself, more to the point, which in some moments was quite embarrassing. So I'm sure you've seen some of the clips on YouTube. So
exactly. We this one was one that I was going to talk about as well. Are you finding it challenging the way that the theatrics are creeping in?
Yeah.
Simulation.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's I think we've seen a number of examples this year of simulation and the way players perhaps try to milk things. And it's not part of the game. And I think Nigel, the comment there on, from that listener on Facebook, this is not soccer, is 100% right. And, I think Nigel's left a wonderful legacy around that and upholding the values of the game. And I think it's so important that, that the game is special for that reason, and it remains special for that reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, what was it? Soccer's 22 players pretending they're injured for 90 minutes. Rugby's 30 players pretending they're not injured. It's big
Very
difference,
true.
right?
Very true.
And apart from yourself, who's the best referee in the world at the moment? I'll give you a soft exit. You can name two or three.
Okay. Well, I think, look, Wayne Barnes, definitely. I mean, Wayne's been around for, a long time. 5 World Cups, absolutely amazing referee, and
doesn't mind a red wine either. Just
loves a red wine. Great great social man off the field. Is it true that Schnoz is your? Yeah. Schwilke is on. I don't know if you're on the call, Schwilke, here as well, mate.
He was. And Carl Dix.
Yeah,
Carl
speaking
Dix.
of red wine. Yeah,
Carl
speaking
Dix.
of red wine.
Yeah. And Schwilke's red wine, yes.
Definitely. No, look, I Barnesy for sure. And then, it's been interesting, Tom, because, if we looked at the last World Cup, we actually lost a lot of experience at the top level. We had Nigel retire. We had Jerome Garces retire. We had Glenn Jackson retire before Rugby World Cup, John Lacey, the Irish referee. So we lost, we lost 5 or 6 very, very experienced kind of senior members of the group. And so, it's been interesting that the international group kind of coming through, you'd see it now with the likes of Matt Carley, really kind of coming through in the big matches, and Luke Pearce as well. So yeah, we've got some fantastic group of young guys that we're all kind of coming through together, which is magic to be a part of.
And the best part is less Frenchmen. That's fantastic too.
Well, I like the Frenchmen. I like their style, and I like their humour on and off the field. So, and Pascal, of course, has retired as well. So there has been a big exodus of referee experience.
Yeah, it's nice to have new ones. Do you subscribe, Angus? And I'm conscious of time, so only one or two more. Do you subscribe to the view that the way the game is refereed in the Northern Hemisphere is different to the Southern Hemisphere?
Look, the product is different. And if we look at Super Rugby, Super Rugby has always been a product which is high octane, high entertainment. Super Rugby's always been tries, expansive play. It's a really unique product, Super Rugby. And I think, what Super Rugby has done well over, the time that it was around to a certain extent, and I suppose we're going to see the next, iteration or version of Super Rugby over the next few years. But I guess in its kind of heyday, so to speak, is that we had great buy-in across, all the teams that were involved in Super Rugby about, how the game was to be played. And certainly as referees, we bought into that as well. Often at our Super Rugby pre-season meetings, we would spend time on what does the shape of the game look like here. We know that teams want to be expansive. We know that teams want to play. How do we contribute to that product as well? How do we keep the game going? How do we give teams opportunity to play? And even just small stuff, Tom, like, can we hold off blowing that holding on penalty just a fraction longer? Because we know that if we get the turnover, then we get counter-attack ball. And once we get counter-attack ball, the ball remains in play. And we often see amazing tries and incredible skill. So little kind of nuances like that around how we would, I guess, fit into the product was, is super important. And so to answer your question, I think the product up in the north is a different product. The premiership up there is a different product. It's different conditions, different style. So, look, it is different, but I think it has a lot to do with the actual product itself. And I think with the product at World Rugby, we're seeing a certain type of product at World Rugby at the moment around the, I guess, the more technical side of the game. And we've seen that with, how the breakdowns kind of evolve with the breakdown interpretations, with, what we've seen there as well. So, we see the games constantly evolving. And I guess the challenge of us as referees is, I guess, knowing that when we do a test match, it's different from Super Rugby. And when we do club rugby, it's different, So it's how we kind of adapt to the various matches that we're a part of, I think, is the critical piece.
I did want to mention this earlier, and because it did actually come up as part of one of our discussions with the Super Rugby refs when we had the pleasure of their company a few years ago. That whole bit around entertainment and let's let the game breathe. It'll be more entertaining. Does it ever enter your mind when you think that's red or yellow card, and it would be a better game if it's a yellow, not a red. And maybe if we're about the entertainment and the product, then it would be better to keep everyone on the pitch.
Of course, I'd be lying if I didn't say that. I mean, look, you know, let's be honest, like as a referee, you know, there are some situations where you think, you know, if I send this player off, you know, that's the end of the game, you know. And I remember a couple of years back, I had France, New Zealand in Wellington, and I sent off Benjamin Fall in the first 15 minutes of the second test in Wellington for a challenge in the air that he got wrong on Bowden Barrett, and that was the test match, and you knew at that moment that the game was over. So, yeah, I think as a referee, you're acutely aware around the impact of your decisions. I think the nice thing is that where we've kind of getting to in the last, you know, couple of years there's been a greater acceptance and probably a greater education of the rugby public around the importance of player safety. And so I guess now what we're seeing is that to make a red card decision becomes easier when there's a lot of alignment across teams and referees and commentators and rugby public around high tackle framework and the importance of trying to change player behaviour for the safety of the game and for the welfare of players. And, you know, I think when you put it into the safety side of things, it makes it an easy decision, you know, that we are trying to make the game as safe as possible. You know, I've got a youngster who's 6 years old and he loves his rugby, and, you know, as a dad, I want it to be safe. So, yeah.
Is the balance returned a little bit? I mean, Rugby World Cup 2019, it seemed to go too far one way, right? Are we getting it right now as a refereeing and as a game? So the balance between safety and what's accidental and
look, I think there'll be contact. Yeah, look, I think there'll be split opinion on that, of course, from, you know, depending on who you ask, and each supporter and spectator will have their own opinion. What I will say is that I think one of the challenges we had at Rugby World Cup 2019 was that the framework that they brought in to try and improve player safety hadn't been around long enough to actually get the change of behaviour that we needed with teams. And so because it was brought in so close to the tournament, we saw a lot of cases of high tackles, and under the framework, they were red, you know, direct contact to the head with force, and you know, there's no choice, you know, our hands are tied type thing. And so it was an uncomfortable place to be for referees and probably for teams because of the ramifications. And I think the fact now that this has been in a little while, we're starting to see that change in player behaviour, and we're starting to see it become more understandable in the game. And I think
mitigation,
mitigation, and a kind of evolution of the process, really, and the framework.
It was an uncomfortable place to be, but it was very black and white.
It was,
it sort of leads me to think also about communication with the TMOs. Are you a fan of having that booming out around the stadium as you have your conversation with the TMO?
Yeah, look, it's certainly very off-putting, and for the first couple of times that you find yourself being kind of, because see, we, you know, for the non-referees on this who are listening in, we you know, we're kind of wired up, and so when the stadium is broadcasting your conversation with the TMO, you're actually getting an echo in your ear as well, and so sometimes you say something twice, thinking that it's an echo in your earpiece, and so it can be quite off-putting in terms of just trying to have a natural and conversational dialogue. I'm a big fan of it, and the reason I'm a big fan of it is because it is an entertainment product, and I think for the 50,000, 60,000 people, 80,000 people sitting in the stadium who aren't watching on TV and don't have the benefit of sports ears or being able to hear the referee, I think it is a great thing for them to be kind of able to hear your dialogue, and for you to, I guess, as a referee, use that moment, that key moment, to explain and educate and take people on the journey around why you're going to make the decision, and that can really help you as a referee. So I think it's a great initiative. I think I think it adds to the entertainment, and I think it adds to the education, and I think it helps us. It helps us.
And it's one of those things that you will have perhaps experienced, and a lot of the guys on the call will experience, paying £5 on the way into Twickenham for RefLink. And having a little throwaway disposable that lets you listen to the voice the whole game. And for non-rugby people at the spectacle, it's a fantastic device. I know that we're talking about the TMO decision, but to have that constant feed of what the referee is saying is a really great learning tool for those who don't understand the game.
And live at the stadium just changes the way you watch the game. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't tried it out. It changed the game, the way you watch a game live.
Yeah, it does. Now, Angus, I'm conscious we've already gone over time.
No, you're right.
I don't think there's any more questions coming from the audience. I just want to again really thank you for your time. I know how much time you do spend away from the family, and we're conscious of the work that you put into the game. Behind the scenes, I'm involved in some of those groups that are looking at that referee profile and working on recruiting referees and what can we do going forward. But we really appreciate the fact that you've spent this time with us and given us a fantastic insight to some anecdotal stuff as well as the serious stuff. And we certainly wish you well on your travels. We're all looking forward to watching you in Bucharest.
I've never been, so it'll be an experience for me as well.
Could be ambulances and police escorts and all kinds of stuff down there. So, look, thanks very much again, and we are really grateful. And on behalf of the Vic Masters and everyone out there watching, thank you for your time. And from a Victorian rugby point of view, we look forward to perhaps one day welcoming you at a dinner down here and thanking you properly.
Love to. Thanks, Tom. And Brendan, thanks for having me. And just a shout out to Vic Masters. I think what you guys do here is absolutely fantastic. And, I'd love, the absolute credit to the game. So thank you for your contribution as well.
No, and thank you both. So thanks, Gus. I know, because for those watching at home, Gus is actually coming to us live from Rugby HQ. So he stayed back late in head office doing some training because he's allowed to, because being a professional. So thanks for hanging back and doing this.
Pleasure.
And Tom,
thanks, guys.
I've enjoyed this. I've been drinking this while you've been talking. a nice wine from up your way, up near Harcourt.
Gee, I'd love to be enjoying one of those at the moment too.
No.
Well, Gus, that's the other thing. Next week, a certain fellow called Graham Cooper is having his honeymoon in Tasmania, and this is my brother's wine from Tasmania, and I booked Coops in for an afternoon session down there. So if you're ever down that way,
I'll be sure to look. I'll be sure to let you know. Thank you very much. I don't need a second invitation there, Tom. Thank you.
No, and again, I just want to give our thanks on behalf of the entire rugby community for all the great work the referees do, and a couple of things as well around what people don't know outside of rugby is the amount of work you do, not only officiating, but you're tying back with the clubs, back in with HQ and Rugby Victoria. I look at the likes of Dixie, who's watching, the amount of work he's put into the club that he loves, South. He's a life member. He continues to give back. Shags, if you're watching, he's tried for years to get off being secretary of Powerhouse and hasn't been able to do it. But I want to just touch on something you said, Tom, about you being custodians of the game. I'm gonna share something, and unfortunately, the Victorian community lost a really great man last year, and Brett Waterford, who was part of a club that I'm associated with. And I think if you want to talk about being custodians of the game, all you need to see is the legacy that he left behind for our rugby community and the outpouring of love and emotion that he was given on the day, but also when I turned up to play at the club, and Powerhouse, the junior club, had built this whole new facility, and they've dedicated a room to Brett as a thank you for the work he's put into the club. and Kathy, Brett's lovely wife, and son Finn have donated this to the club that they love. So these are the things that people from outside our sport don't see about the connection between our refs and the game we play. So I thought I just wanted to share that with you guys. And Tom, you're at the funeral and you delivered an amazing eulogy, and I just wanted to leave you both with that. So thank you both for joining in.
Nice touch. Thank you.
Yeah. No. And Angus, enjoy the trip off in November and have fun in the States and touring around, and definitely give TJ if he's playing. Just when you pull him up, just tell him the Vic Masters told you to do it.
Awesome. No, look, thanks again for having me, and look, everyone who's out there, just stay safe in lockdown, and hopefully we'll be out of here soon. So yeah, all the best to everyone.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Tune in next week. Rob Leota, our newest Wallaby. Thanks everyone.